Okay, well, welcome everyone. It's been an amazing day. I have to admit a few things right up front. One is I almost constructed this panel based on people I wanted to meet with this week. So we're just going to have a meeting. We're going to talk about things that are important to us, and hopefully they're informative for you, because we have it's three of my favorite people and partners, and so we'll have a little bit of fun. They all know that it is as legitimate to direct the questions and ire to me as we will to each other. So we're going to make this very fluid. But let's also the topic is, and I think it leads very well from what Nick just presented, is the topic is that we're seeing tremendous progress in the tokenization of identity, money, and objects, and the wallet infrastructure to hold them, to fundamentally change our experiences, change business models, really reshape how the world lives and works. And so against that context, I've got a great set of experts here to explore this in a number of different ways. So maybe I'll just ask each one of you to introduce yourself, tell your story, and then we'll get into it. Caroline, do you want to
Sure.
start?
It's the whole story right from day zero.
And it is fun that I've gotten to know, we've known each other now through multiple roles and contexts over this journey over the past, I won't say how many years.
So that is true. And when I first met David, I was setting up and running the Blockchain Policy Center at the OECD, which I did for a number of years. But now I run the public policy team at Chainalysis, which I'm sure many of you know, doing data analytics in this space, looking at AML, but also other use cases to better understand the market that we all work in. And yeah, very excited to be here. There's still a lot to be done, even though we are sort of, I often say we're 15 years in, and yet we are only 15 years in at the same time. So really excited also to see what comes ahead.
I'm Sheila Warren. I'm the CEO of the Crypto Council, and I started my blockchain journey in civic tech, which I spent 10 years in, partially as a lawyer, partially as a builder of product. But I met Dave when I was the founding head of the blockchain team at the WEF. And by the time I left in 22 to take this job, I ran all of tech policy, and I ran what was called the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I was on Caroline's advisory board, so there's a long history, again, as you know, of this. And today, these topics are unbelievably important and underlie everything. So looking forward to the chat.
My name is Daniel Goldscheider. I'm the founder and executive director of the OpenWallet Foundation. We heard a lot about open standards today, and they are clearly important. When you think about web browsers, every web browser and the web itself is based on open standards, HTTP, HTML, JavaScript. But every web browser is also based on open source, because a web browser is actually a combination of many different standards. And open source helps to reduce the cost, to increase security and privacy. And we think the same is true for digital wallets. So we want to build open source software on top of open standards to drive secure and interoperable wallets. And Accenture is one of our founding premier members. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you for being part of OpenWallet.
No, and thank you all for being here. Maybe just through a lot of the content today, and up and down the promenade, and in the Congress Center, I think there's been a lot on the current state. So maybe should we take that as granted a little bit? We can touch on it. One of my reflections as I think about, and I will own this. As I think back over the past 5 or 6 years, I regret that I've approached this whole space really thinking about these things in separate tracks. I've had a separate digital currency team, and even within that, a separate team on central bank digital currency versus stablecoin versus, the role that we've been playing in the crypto space is just minor. We can talk about that. But I've had a separate digital identity team. I've had a separate core capital market infrastructure development team, and then I've developed a separate open wallet wallet team, and I regret that, because actually when I think about or when any of us think about any actual valuable business transaction, government interaction, service provision, it necessarily includes all three of those. If certainly two, usually all three of who we are. What is it that we're trying to do, the product or service, and how will we pay for it? and bringing those things together. And so I regret that, but we now have this huge opportunity. And Sheila, you want to?
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the biggest challenges I had at the forum was when I got there, there was a digital identity stream, there was a blockchain technology stream, there was a digital asset stream, and it took me 4 years to weave all that together. And by the time I left, I had AI, data, anything related to Web3 technologies, Metaverse, all under me. And the effort of doing that, I was like, I gotta get out of here, but it all weaved together. And, I've been describing this lately as there was a point in time when I think, if you think about a hamburger, you can talk about like, oh, where are we sourcing the meat and where are the tomatoes from? I'm from San Francisco. This is a relevant conversation. What about the lettuce? What kind of bun are we using? But at some point you're like, can we just have the hamburger? Like we're just going to eat and we're just at that. We've been at that point for some time and we are definitely at that point now. And it's interesting to me to see how this remains, I think, Davos, one of the few places where I'm still having meetings that are about the bun and the tomato and the lettuce, and everywhere else that I go, it's really about the hamburger. And I find that very, very interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think if it's any reassurance, like there's nothing to regret, as in like that's a natural state to have been in, and yet it is now time to sort of graduate to kind of the full hamburger conversation. And because both in my role at OECD and now at Chainalysis, I do a huge amount of work with governments. And one of the things I think a lot about, particularly as we look to the future, is I think about the spectrum of assets. And I think, at one end of the spectrum, we have financial assets. And down the other end of the spectrum, we have data assets. And then we have this kind of gray area in between. And I think our space and sort of the AI space are going to converge on this spectrum. And for digital assets, it really comes up in the sort of NFT space because it's the natural tendencies and financial regulators, everyone wants to put more things within their jurisdiction. So they kind of open their arms and try to grab the NFTs as well. And I'm not sure that's the right answer from a policy perspective in terms of coherency, because it's starting to get very difficult to draw a line between what's a data asset and what's a financial asset when we think about financial not as money, but as value. And so I think that is the sort of meta conversation which now needs to take place, and it crosses these different technologies. And I think that's not what we're having yet, because we're still having lots of bilateral with financial regulators, but they're not going to give up their jurisdictions. You actually need to go above that and have that more sort of meta conversation around what is this future where, on the AI side, we now have content creators who are like, hold on, you can't just eat all my content and then regurgitate it back to me without any kind of compensation for that, which is essentially has been the model of the internet up until today. But now that is getting more and more integrated into our lives, it's not enough to just say, well, that's just the way the internet is. It's just how it works. More and more people are putting their kind of, assets in all different forms out into the world. We now have the technology, the trust builder to be able to kind of bring that. And I think that's where sort of blockchain can bring something to the AI space, while AI can bring that, kind of bring those utility, those use cases to the blockchain space as well.
Yeah, I like the hamburger example because I think most people probably here in the room as well prefer hamburgers to lettuce alone and just eating lettuce for dinner. And I think the same is true for digital wallets as well. So if I'm trying to sell you a wallet, physical plain old wallet, and you like the material and you like the color and the shape, and you're about to buy it, and then I say, Harm, there is one thing you should know. It is only good for bank cards. And you say, what, I cannot put a driver's license in? Nope, no driver's license. My golf club card or tennis card? Nope, works just for your money. You would very likely not be interested in that wallet. You would say, what kind of wallet is this? And probably turn around and go to some other shop and buy some other wallet. So I think consumers have a natural interest in wallets, whether they're analog or digital, that are not one-trick ponies, but basically able to address many use cases. There is also the perspective, not just from the end user, but from security and from abusing things. Vicky is here in the audience. She's heading the Cloud Signature Consortium. And this is one of my favorite examples. I used to run a company in Germany that we had the largest bank identity network there. And if you're a bank and you want to pass on KYC data to another bank, you can do so, but only if the data, I think, is a maximum of 2 or 3 years old. So if you have KYC'd someone 5 years ago, and I'm another bank and I issue your credit card, you cannot use that data. However, under German law, you can basically use that data to create a qualified electronic signature, even if the KYC data is 25 years old. And then I can use the electronic signature to create another banking relationship. So it's essentially two different rules, in this case, AML and EIDAS, that in Germany are not in harmony. And so while the data is not good enough on its own, if you put the very same data in a signature, all of a sudden it's good enough, which makes no sense whatsoever. So I think thinking about these use cases holistically makes a lot of sense, because if we don't, we create a product that consumers will not want, and we create loopholes.
All right, so I'm going to pull on the holistic use case thing, and I think I love the hamburger. Thank you. I'm stuck on the hamburger. Yeah. One of my other regrets, as I look back over the past decade of being in the space, is woefully not paying nearly enough attention to the experience. Right, we've created some horrendous product. I've got to memorize 20 words. I've got to, it's like, even if I think back to some of the early demos, right? Like we wanted to be able to show how blockchain worked, so we literally would put like something that could have been faked out and stubbed out on the left of actually like the result, and on the right we'd literally have the code flowing, like to try to like demonstrate that it's really happening. It's very hard to demonstrate, the movement of data, right? But we've neglected, I think, an opportunity that I think now is very much in front of us, which is, if you think about most everything we do, and I'll use a very personal example. My family, we tried to go we tried to go to Hawaii last Christmas. Live on the East Coast, and snowstorm rolled through, canceled our vacation while we were in the airport terminal, right? So just really frustrating, but. In that moment, I, as the human, had to be the point of integration between the airline, the car rental agency, the hotel, the restaurant bookings, and a boat charter that we had organized. And we do that in every facet of our lives. We're just used to being our own points of integration amidst the bilateral relationships with all of the service providers, authorities, and others that we interact with. And actually, now I think I see opportunity for us to think about, one, really good experience, like let's design like user-centric experience design at the heart of what we're doing, but also just this notion of addressing, helping the fact that humans have to be the point of integration across identity, money, and objects, and I think enabled through all that infrastructure. And so that possibility of having, I live in the innovation world, so I get to talk over the horizon all the time, but it's not that far away. I would argue I could do what I'm about to say somewhat now. As I collect that personal data store, whatever you want to call it, right? Whether it's wallet infrastructure, data vault, personal data, that my ability to have my own AI agent running on my own data within my own firewall to then be able to relate to the agents of those service providers and authorities to basically say, hey, snowstorm, vacation canceled, can you go please talk to, go please work it out, right? That is upon us. And those kinds of business model changes as to what does that mean for how this plays out is super interesting to me. So let me throw that out as chum for the waters here.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like we've kind of let ourselves down on the user experience. There's no question. I think you see that a lot when you see, you look at DeFi and, it offers all these efficiencies, and yet we don't have the scale of adoption that you might expect. And a lot of that is the user experience. Like, it's hard work to do it. It's hard work to engage with it. Frankly, a lot of people don't want to be their own bank when being their own bank means actually remembering a 20-word, seed phrase. That's just not on the agenda for most people. So I think working to improve that and using some of the other sort of technology that is coming online as well and is maturing to be able to kind of bridge some of those gaps and make the space more accessible, including like in the financial world and in this kind of much broader world, which I think blockchain can be the trust component in that space that you're talking about.
I raised this at one point to a Bitcoin core developer, and the response was like, well, that was a feature, not a bug. It was meant to be really complicated, right? And I was like, well, that's fine. And certainly there was a time when that tracked and made sense, but at some point, like, nerd product is product for nerds, and not everyone can do that, So I'm not necessarily saying all the way to the ETF, but the point is, I think what makes the Bitcoin spot ETF so exciting to me is the form factor. Right? I mean, I think that's what makes it exciting to all of us is this idea that there are people. I remember I was talking to somebody on a panel at some point, and I said, what do you actually think the Venn diagram overlap is of like people that are only going to self-host, self-custody, and people that are only going to use an ETF? I'm pretty sure it's not even like this. It's probably like, you know what I mean? Those are just not groups that are meeting. And in fact, I think some folks are probably going to do both just to kind of figure it out. So I think, there did have to be fair, it's a bit, oh my God, it's a bit like the hamburger. Or at some point, it made sense to talk about tomatoes and the meat and the lettuce. And at some point, you have to kind of make it accessible to people in a way that they can just use it without having to think too much, right? And a lot of the things that we prize in it...
Do you want some water?
I do. Or I could just, cough till I die up here is also an option, apparently. Thank you so much. But yeah, I think that at some point it has to be... Thank you so much. It has to be simple. It has to be straightforward. It has to be streamlined. And people don't want to have to pay too much attention. But you need to do that without sacrificing the features. And to your point, Karan, that takes a lot of time. It's taken a lot of time.
A long time ago, I worked in New York, and my boss was the chairman of the Museum of Modern Art. And they were looking to extend the museum. And I forgot the name of the architect, but I remember what he said. He said to the jury that awarded the project, give me an inordinate amount of money and I will make the museum disappear. I will design a museum, I will architect something that is not in your face. It is in the background. It will let the artwork shine. A little like a bridesmaid, who should not be bigger than the bride. Your job is basically to stay in the background. And interestingly enough, I think when it comes to UX, it is very much like that. You want user interface to disappear. You want it to get out of your way. You want it to become invisible because it's so logical. It is so clear that you don't even realize that you are interacting with something because it's just obvious. And this is really difficult because a lot of people are trying to make something as beautiful, as interesting, as exciting as possible. But when it comes to user interface, I think it should just get out of your way. It should just be super, super easy. And this is interesting for every new technology because new technologies typically are pioneered by the developers, by the nerds, by the people who think about the beauty of the invention rather than how to get out of your way. And so I concur with everyone else basically here. I think we are at a point where we need to take that extra step. Not just to be in love with what we're creating, but by making it accessible for anyone. And if that means hiding the complexity, that's a good thing. That's a feature and not a bug.
I'm still laughing, though, at the image of you with like the code running on the side. It's just really funny, but it was very creative.
If we had
made the point.
Proved that something was like this semi-pretty thing you're seeing happening is real. We didn't just fake it out. We don't.
We've all evolved.
So in terms of how this then plays out, like I think we have an alignment of a vision of these things coming together and needing to work together and to be lovable, right? Instead of minimal viable product, we need minimal lovable product here. That's actually useful. Some of the barriers are obvious, but maybe if you could maybe emphasize the non-obvious. Are there things that haven't come up or are more unusual that you would see would catalyze action? Wishes, hopes, or observations? I'll leave it to you.
I'm happy to start. I think there are problems on every level. So the good news is if you're looking to do something, this is a great area because there is a lot to do. On the standards itself, every little use case has its own standard. And that is absurd. It is not something that we want to see in the long term. And not just its own standard, but its own trust framework. So, when you are at the end of the day talking about a verifiable credential, it doesn't really matter whether it's a credit card or whether it's a debit card or maybe it's a passport or anything else. At the end of the day, it's a verifiable credential. So I think there is a lot of work to be done to bring the standard development organizations and the people that are working on these standards together and say, can we do something here without creating yet another standard? So we go from 16 to 17 standards. And then I think we have this opportunity to bring people together and think some of the hard questions through jointly. So for instance, you have this question of revocation, right? You have a driver's license, but you are speeding, and in Switzerland, anyone who's not Swiss and doesn't know, don't speed in Switzerland. But if you're speeding in Switzerland, it's very easy to lose your license. So basically, it's not enough to know whether you have in principle a license or not, but whether it's actually at the moment, valid, and if you're allowed to drive a car. Now, the same thing is true for instance, insurance that is tied to your job. You lose a job, or maybe you don't lose it. You just no longer want to work there. You quit, and that insurance was running until the end of next year, but now that you quit, it's no longer there. What we're having today is basically people in the MDL space, the mobile driver's license space, and you have people that are thinking about the social security aspect, and they're thinking both about revocation, but they're thinking about it in splendid isolation. And the same is true in so many other areas, like holder binding, right? An important question for so many different credentials. So I think this would be my hope, that people are going to start coming together. And if you have a great idea, maybe I should look at that, and vice versa.
I'm going to repeat something I've been saying all week, which is I think that similarly in standards, I think you're seeing just super hyper customized policy interventions being attempted, which is a different similar problem, right? They're too small in some cases, they're too narrow, or they're so vague as to not be helpful, which are often the options you get in policies. It's not like an unusual, custom just to this space thing. But I think that the over-indexing on financial services in the digital assets and blockchain industry has not served us well for very good reasons. That is one of the most highly regulated industries that exist in the world. And the fact that we are having to constantly make the case within that regulatory authority globally about our validity and legitimacy, is not, it's not a good starting frame. It's been a very challenging starting frame. Now, again, I think there are very good reasons that that's so highly regulated, but there are very good reasons that this industry should not necessarily be similarly regulated because it is a broader value proposition. So my hope is that as the conversation continues to expand beyond just money and currency and payments to a lot of other things, including some of the things that we're talking about today, we'll be able to have a more holistic hamburger-like conversation with regulators. Now, that is also a real pipe dream because those bodies don't touch each other either. So you're already seeing we're the AI regulators, and then we're the financial regulators, and then we're the all these kinds of things. Data, those are all different regimes, and the reality is that we also have to see some innovation in the regulatory space to start to connect these things together. Because again, trying to do any of this as isolation, you might have the most gorgeous tomato in the world, but its value is limited if it can't be put into other contexts. So this is I think it's just a fervent wish. I'm not sure it's going to manifest, but isn't this the week we put things out there and hope that they come true? And that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and I think actually one of the risks to both on the sort of standard setting front, like not getting some sort of coalescing and not getting some sort of harmony on the regulation front, and this is probably, I think, on my mind, this is WEF, Davos, is the kind of the geopolitics of where we are today. And I think that it gets a lot of press in some areas, in some sort of technology areas, and I think probably hasn't had enough consideration in the sort of blockchain space, that there is some very big shifts going on. And so it's not just about like different standards across different use cases, but across different countries, across different regions that we're now going to look at. And sort of coming back to your original point, Daniel, which is about this sort of, open source. So whether, and I'm usually not going to take a position on sort of open source versus sort of some sort of common standards, but either of those worlds requires to us to really kind of get the benefit is for those to be sort of globally applicable. And I think there is very significant risk that that is not going to happen. That's also very true when it comes to the regulation side. And so how can we sort of try and embed, and frankly, as quickly as possible, some of those by design sort of technology standards or some of the regulatory hopes. If we think back to the sort of some of the writings around the early internet days, and thinking particularly of sort of Lawrence Lessig and this idea he has of these different mechanisms that can push forward how a market develops. And you can look at market forces, you can look at regulation, you can look at norms, and you can sort of do it by design. And I think we're going to have a lot of more challenges on doing it on the regulatory front in a global, sort of globally coherent way. And we need to start looking at some of the by design and some of the market forces that we can push to keep the openness that we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, David, if I may just add something to what you just said. I mean, imagine in the world of web browsers, if you would click on a link and it would say, oh, this link does not work with that web browser. You need to install a different web browser. And then you click on another one and, oh, no, now you need the New York Times browser because you're on the New York Times website. And then as you say, so this is a problem between use cases. And then imagine there would be a Hungarian web browser and a Swedish web browser and a Brazilian web browser. And then you visit Brazil and, the web browser you have installed is no longer working because now you need to download the... Now, this is completely ridiculous, but the interesting thing is in the wallet space, a lot of people don't even think this is a problem. You have a wallet for, one little thing that works in one country, and then you have another one for another use case. So I think... when you look at email clients or when you look at web browsers, there's such a good analogy that you want universal tools that transcend use cases and they transcend geographical boundaries.
And I think, again, this is in part because we started off talking about money and everyone freaked out. And they're like, well, if it's this kind of money or that kind of money, or it's going to do this thing or that thing, it's got to be coded, it's got to be held differently. And you're like, that doesn't actually make any sense. And if we'd started with the broader proposition, to your point about the driver's license, being able to hold all the things. And so now we're trying to kind of reverse that and we're trying to move into that world, which is the proper place to be. But again, I'll just kind of land the point one more time, which is the fact that we started in the currency space led to certain developments, to the focus on certain priorities that wouldn't normally have come first, right? Normally the connection, the interoperability, that all would have been built first, and then you got kind of, the applications, right? But we started the other way. So we can get there, but there's a reason that, so many of us are like, it's like beating your head against a wall. And it's having to sort of connect dots that naturally connect technically, but that don't connect in the narrative or in the user's expectations even at this moment of what is actually the right thing to do.
Imagine you come to Switzerland and you want, you buy something and you want to put 3 Swiss francs in your wallet, and the wallet says error, sorry, the different currency. You cannot put this money into the wallet.
It's fun on panels to have a little bit of disagreement. We'll introduce so I don't disagree. I fundamentally agree with if I go back a point around the need for much more global dialogue and harmonization around open source and open standards, right? Or contributions to open source and discussion about open standards. The other thing though that I think we do a really bad job of is we view too much of this as binary. Like it's left or it's right? It's this or it's that. And actually, one of the massive technological advantages of this suite of technologies, and I think it is a suite, not one thing, is it's wildly configurable. And so I think we can have a really great dialogue around what is truly common, right? Like, I think, thou shalt not kill is pretty ubiquitously like, that works.
That's who you are.
Yeah, that should be ubiquitously.
Yes.
But there's some things that I think we universally can agree on that form the real common foundation for all of this. But then the ability to have it be configurable to individual communities' needs and desires and laws and regulations, I think is a really special part of what blockchain and the suite of technologies provides, and we should embrace that too. Right, because sometimes I think we talk past each other, and some of the arguments aren't arguments. You build for you, right, and you build for you. Obviously, without getting into the dystopian world that Daniel was starting to describe of a wallet per thing, or there's a reasonableness to what I'm suggesting, but I also think if you think globally across even just 3 regions or the like, we have different community values, and that's okay because this tech is wildly configurable.
I agree with you on this completely, and the reason is I think that we think about scale wrong. We have to start thinking about scale differently. And so when you think about scale and you think about the scale of the internet, it's basically unbounded, right? But people think about scale and success, they think about like Facebook or whatever, right? And they're like, well, it's a winner take all situation, and one wallet is going to be, if they're going to win, then I got to win, and I got to build, So it becomes a very competitive practice. And again, it's because we skipped a step, right? And so the internet, it really benefited from not having the internet, right? So there was time when a lot of people had no idea the internet was coming, and they had no idea what it was. And then when it came, they were like, I don't know what that thing is. And then you had to go through dial-up, and it was very pain in the butt. All of that, we have the internet. And so people have been tracking this very closely and being eager for it and wanting to use it, and things have been moving into production at a great pace, which is great, but also not great. And so to me, I think this is exactly the point. And so I talk a lot about micro communities and the idea that rather than one solution or one application that's going to work for everybody, it's about configuration, it's about programmability, it's about saying you can spin something up and down, you can create something, and the scaling has to be measured at a different level of abstraction. It's not measured in the specific thing, because that might be relevant to like 10 people, 20 people, 100 people, whatever it is, and it may be that that's not relevant to any other community ever, because it was time delimited, it was geographically delimited, it was, I don't know, whatever it was, right? But the use of the underlying architecture in all of these configurations ways systematically is how I think we have to think about scale. And so for folks who are working, I think, on protocols, you naturally think this way. For folks who aren't doing that, it's a little bit of a mind shift to get your head around it. And certainly for a regulator, it's a massive mind shift to get your head around it. So all of that conversation education is happening in real time, and it's only getting easier to have the discussion is the great news. I've been in this space full time since 17 and in it since 15, and it is only getting easier to have the conversation. But again, there's like unwinds that are having to be done a little bit, both in the sort of build space and in the policy space, to accommodate what I think is the burgeoning awareness and reality of exactly what you just said.
I want to go back to something, Caroline, you raised. You can't miss AI up and down the promenade, and again, is that reference of this, really our space being a suite of technologies. This is not, not one thing. I've got a strong view on it, but you raised it. I'd love to hear your views on, what is the interplay between, and it doesn't have to be just blockchain plus AI, but I will throw spatial computing in as well, just for kicks, and and obviously cloud and security, and edge computing and homomorphic encryption, and we can go on and on. But Caroline, what was on your mind when you raised that? Because I think it's important.
Yeah, well, I guess I was thinking of it because we mentioned the user experience, and I think that's probably one area where AI can help us out a lot. Like I don't need to know how to code because I'm just going to tell my AI agent to go and do something, achieve this end. And it can now deal with the DeFi protocol rather than me doing that. One challenge I would say in the digital space that it's going to exacerbate, though, and I think that, again, we need to pay a lot more attention, is just the sort of the cybersecurity aspect that we, even at very basic cyber hygiene, if like we do want this future of like very digitally native assets, money, objects, and like we like have a long way to go to make this a system that everyone can be comfortable with. And then you add in the layer of what I mentioned before, so the geopolitical situation that we're in, some of those risks are only going to get exacerbated because of the cyber warfare angle. And I feel like a lot more needs to be done to appreciate what some of those risks are and take honestly some quite basic steps as a starting point to address the cyber risks. I mean, I'm sure you all know we follow very closely things like ransomware, hacks in this space, stolen funds, and like this is not a problem that is going away. Quite the opposite. And I think we need to do a lot more if we do want to bring more and more people into this space and make it much more accessible. AI can be both a tool to help us with that, but it also is going to in itself bring its own,
So, yeah, I actually did a thread in a post, or I don't know, I was trying to think of when I did it, but what is a day? I don't even know what it is. Yesterday, today, I have no, at some point, very recently, and Bloomberg picked it up. And I think I actually came up with the hamburger thing in frustration because I was on 3 hours of sleep, and I was like, we're not talking just about decentralized technologies, we're also talking about AI. And this person was like, I was just like, it's like the hamburger, So I think for me, a lot of the challenges being articulated in AI with the ethics, the bias, the lack of transparency, all these kinds of things, moderation, how you do all these things, I think if only we had a way that you could actually track inputs and, you know what I mean? So it's a little frustrating to me that so many of the part of the solution, certainly not the entirety of the solution, part of the solution to some of the challenges around Gen AI that people are spinning themselves up about into a frenzy here on the Promenade and in the Congress Center about can be solved by the underlying base architecture being an open professional centralized system like a blockchain, So, and you say this to people and who think that like, I'm going to use AI for everything and it's going to steal all my everything. And you're like, well, there are ways of doing this. And so people who are working in the tech space obviously understand this, but because this is such a broader conversation, because most people at this point have engaged with an AI in some fashion, knowingly or not knowingly, and ever more knowingly, right? There's more of a sort of drama and fear and hype cycle around that kind of thing. So to me, the idea that we are not head on leading in many conversations with the idea that those challenges are exactly what this technology is designed to do is a big miss. It's something that I'm doing a lot of. But my hope is that, again, like as these threads start to connect and as people start to calm down a little bit and, some of the sort of fear-mongering that I think gets a lot of clicks and hits starts to die down a little, and people realize the world is not actually ending, I hope. I think we're going to see, or not for these reasons anyway, I think hopefully we'll start to see a little bit more rationalization of this. And to your point about all the other various kinds of cryptography, right? Zero-knowledge proofs as being a method of identity that can actually help articulate the veracity of an AI, of a learning model. All of these things are moving, into the mainstream in terms of the tech stack right now. So, like I say, the conversation is ongoing. It's a very complicated conversation. It's hard to get people who, think they're having a discussion about AI to then suddenly realize they're having a conversation about all these other things, and to see that holistic picture. But that is, I think, the work that many of us need to be starting to focus on. I know you do, for sure, Dave.
Who here has done video authentication where you hold your passport in a video camera and you... So I was on the board of a company that does just that for many years. And I think this model is going to come under a lot of scrutiny because of AI. Because you will be able to, look in the camera and look like me. And you will hold a passport that looks like my passport. And AI is going to make sure that it looks so nice that any human call center agent that are looking at that will have real trouble to say this is actually me and not you. So I think what we're working on is going to become even more relevant in a world of AI because we're going to have more and more challenges to know what we can trust. You hear a familiar voice on the phone and you will no longer be sure whether that's actually your mom or your son or, your best friend. And I think this is where, the reinvention of trust models is going to be so important. It used to be really easy, right? I knew you from kindergarten. I know how you look. I know how you sound. I might even know how you smell. I know this is you. The internet already made that more difficult because I basically now interact with you 6,000 kilometers away, and that's harder. And AI is going to make it harder still.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is going to reverse the kind of, it's not going to be trust by default, it's going to be non-trust by default. We're going to be proving the trust of things, not proving the distrust. And that's really where these things come together. And I hope that it's not, I feel sometimes in our space that it's like, oh, like it's a competition with AI. Like we're not in competition. Like this is, and we need to, if they're, we need to build a bridge over that if that is the case.
So one of my other pet peeves about what we've been doing is the inadequacy of our language, right? And now we have a whole new set of language coming at us. The one thing I picked up on over the past couple of months is there's a really interesting crossover that I think we need to embrace or at least engage with. Is in the AI world, the AI engineers, they're talking about the use of the word token for the individual data elements that go into the foundational models that then run the AIs. I think that I'm hoping if anyone has the etymology,
Like, that's my word. Don't take my word.
no, exactly, yeah, exactly the opposite of like oh my gosh,
take it.
If that was really thoughtful, oh my god, like you nailed it, because this community is focused on the tokenization of all the important things that we should be most concerned about to feed into the model. So brilliant, we agree on token. Like, come, we've been sorting that one out for a while, and so but I really think that's I'm encouraged if we can get the communities to use that word in the same way, and the possibility of what that means if I'm starting to really collect the tokenized version of my identity, money, and objects, my ability to be, to have my own personal AI capability, confidently reading from just my data, interacting within an ecosystem of agents that were developed, from the service, and we have an agent ecosystem that gives me hope. Right, that gives me excitement and hope, and I think so. I think we have to get. I think we got to agree that their meaning of the word token is call us or we'll call you or
One in the water's
put the two teams together. We got to jump on that. And the like, and so I want to keep going. So we'll just move this to the break room in the back. But I'm getting the hook here. Thank you each. I can't tell you how much our space often gets dominated by very big personalities and in very hyped ways. Caroline, Sheila, and Daniel are obviously very prominent and out there. I don't mean to say you're not out there, but your presence publicly does not do service to the actual leadership that you apply driving this innovation wave. And so on behalf of our community, I want to thank each one of you for that and for being here with me today. And like I said, some of my favorite people.